Hey everybody, here we are for another TechBiz tutorial. This is part 2 in our learning how to do programming with Python. Last tutorial we got Python downloaded for our computer, and we also downloaded the text editor Sublime. So we're going to start off opening up Sublime. I saved it on my desktop, and so I'm going to open that up. And then we're also going to need to go down to our start button and go down to the command prompt. We're going to need that as well. Alright, so the first thing we're going to learn about with Python is a little bit of output and input. So we can start off with the classic hello world. So we're going to start off on line 1 in Sublime and type in the word print. Then we're going to put in a parentheses, and you'll notice it automatically closes the parentheses for us. And it'll do the same thing when we type in our quotation marks. And we're going to type in hello world. Alright, now we're going to go File and Save As. And for this, let's go to our Documents and make a new folder in there, and we'll call it Programs. That way we can keep everything kind of together while we do these tutorials. And we'll call this one test.py. You'll notice when we save it as a py, it changes the colors for the font types, which makes it a lot easier when we get to some of the more complex programs. Alright, so now we want to test this, so we're going to go to our command prompt, and we want to go to our programs, cd space documents, and then we're going to cd space programs. Okay, now we're ready to open our file, or to run it. And to run a Python program, you start off by typing py and then space and then the name of your file. So in this case, test.py, and we type it in. It says hello world. Alright, so another thing we can do with text is we can have it take up multiple lines. So if I go with a / and an N right after hello world but before my quotation marks, and then I can type in we are learning Python. We'll click save and go back over here to the command prompt and py/test.py, and hello world, we are learning Python. So you can kind of get an idea of how to make this program write out text. Another thing that we can do is we can have different variables that we want it to print out for us. So for example, x equals 5, then we could say print x, file save, and then we'll go over to the command prompt, py test.py, and it prints the number 5. Another thing we could do is say y is equal to 10, and then we could say print x plus y, and then go over to the command prompt, py test.py, and enter, and it adds them together. So you can string together different variables in the same with text as well. Alright, so we have those things done. So what we want to do now is we want to kind of learn how we could put in some input. So the program will ask us to type in something, and then it'll repeat it back to us, in other words. So for example here, we could start off and say name, and then we would say input, and then we're going to ask the question that the program is going to ask us. So we could say quotation marks, then what is your name, and then underneath that, in line 2, we could say print then quotation marks, we could say hello, and then put a plus, and then type in name. Alright, so we'll go to save, and then we can go over to the command prompt, and py test.py asks us what our name is. And the words are all together right there, so what I should have done is put a space after the code there. And so now if I went into py test.py, what is your name? And we have our greeting. So that's how we can get input with text. We can also do this with numbers, but it works a little bit different, because with input of numbers, you're usually wanting a value, so you can use those numbers for some kind of a mathematical value later on. So to start that off, we just go to, we could say x is equal to int, and then we're going to put in our parentheses here, and then we're going to say input, because this is an input, and then we're going to put in another set of parentheses, and we're going to say pick a number, and then underneath that we could say print, and we're going to have to do this a little bit different. So for example, if we want to put text with this, we could say you chose this number, and then we're going to have another line and say print x. Because this is an integer and this is text, it will not let us print mixed types in one string. So this is kind of a way to work around that, and we'll talk more about that as we get more in depth with these courses. So we'll say file save, and we're going to go to py test.py. It's asking us a number, and it says you chose this number. Now let's try this again though, and we could say py test.py, and it asks us for a number 4.8, for example, and we have an error. Okay, so if we want there to allow decimals with this, we're going to go back up to the top, and we could say x equals float, and then a parentheses, and then input, and then parentheses, and we could say choose a number. Oops, forgot my quotation marks. Choose a number, and then we could say print parentheses quotation marks, and we would say you chose this number, and then we could go down to line 3 and type in print and put in our x. So we'll go to save, and then we'll go to py test.py. Oops, py test.py, had a little typo. Chooses a number 8.2. You chose this number 8.2. Alright, so that's going to conclude our first tutorial. Kind of play around with those and see how you can kind of manipulate those little demonstrations we just did, and see if you can learn as much as you possibly can about simple text input and output using Python. We'll see you at the next tutorial.